everybody, welcome to What Culture Gaming. I'm Scott, joined by Josh.
Hello, Scott.
Josh, my friend, the Microsoft Activision deal still hasn't fully gone through, but you might as well think that it has because people are tweeting about it, and the conversation in general is definitely pointing in that direction. So let's talk about all the ramifications that will come from the deal that is 99.9% going to happen in the end. Phil Spencer over on Twitter has been tweeting saying that they have reached an agreement between Sony and Microsoft over Call of Duty exclusivity, saying we are pleased to announce that Microsoft and PlayStation have signed a binding agreement to keep Call of Duty on PlayStation following the acquisition of Activision Blizzard. We look forward to a future where players globally have more choice to play their favourite games. Now this is funny because an email between Phil Spencer and Jim Ryan dated the close of May, but it does reference conversations that were happening in January, mentioned wanting to make sure that all Activision titles are on PlayStation going forward, which for whatever the reason isn't the case anymore. The only thing that is being locked down is Call of Duty, but it's weird because in that email Spencer himself says that going forward, if they went with the original deal, Microsoft would keep, quote, all existing Activision console titles on Sony, including future versions of the Call of Duty franchise or any other current Activision franchise on Sony through up until December 31st, 2027. Spencer said it's the right thing to do. So some things clearly changed behind the scenes.
Absolutely, but I even think that part of it could still happen. Like you said, only existing games that are already multi-platform until 2027. That's only a few years away. It's probably unlikely that most of those big Activision titles anyway would get a sequel by then. Like, we've just got a new Diablo, we've just got a new Overwatch, obviously we get Call of Duty every single year. Like, I can't even imagine any of those games getting proper sequels or further installments before then.
Where's Tony Hawk's?
I know, where is Tony Hawk's? Well,
Where's
Vicarious Visions got folded in with Blizzard, didn't they? I mean, that should be Microsoft's like day one thing, like, please get us more Crash games, please get us more Tony Hawk games. And the Call of Duty thing, to me, is just kind of writing on the wall, isn't it? Obviously, the FTC had their preliminary blocking of the deal kind of thrown out, and while they still can put up a bit of a fight, they can't block the deal right now. So to me, this is Sony just kind of going, well, this thing's happening, let's get this deal in, get as good as terms as we can possibly get, because there's no resistance anymore to it.
It's so crazy because it has been going on for about a year. The original closure date was July 18th, tomorrow, by the time you're watching this, if you're watching this on Monday, and I'll get back to that in a bit, but it feels like, it has just dragged on and on and on, and that original deal of, making sure Call of Duty is still available on PlayStation was originally pitched back in December last year. That's how long it's been dragged out, various different versions of it coming together, but the one that they've finally gone with is just Call of Duty, being on PlayStation until 2027. The thing that I think is interesting here, the sort of through line, the meat of the conversation here that I think is easier for a lot of people to latch onto, is the conversation around monthly catalogs of games, whether something like Game Pass is the future of gaming, or whether PlayStation putting so much money into first-party exclusives and, making that the big reason that you buy the system. Those are sort of the two approaches to the future of gaming, and we'll get back to that overall. I just think that's an overall talking point that I feel like is a through line to everything that's happening here. You have Microsoft spending so much money getting this incredible monthly catalog, and hoping that just kind of works out. They don't have a Last of Us or a Ghost of Tsushima or whatever it is. They just have bulk. They have sheer amount, bang for your buck, etc. And they're hoping that is enough, going forward. Thoughts on that, sir?
No, I think they've got both. They have bulk, of course they do. They've bought all of these studios, and they have all of these titles, all of these franchises, all of this IP to put on their platform. But I'm not going to say that Activision games are as good as the Sony first-party stuff that you mentioned there. But in terms of sales, you look at Call of Duty, you look at Diablos, you look at their big hitters. There's a reason Activision Blizzard only makes a few games every few years, and that's because they only need a couple to sell extremely well and bring that money in. So in terms of like the big franchises combined with the bulk, I think this deal would unfortunately perhaps give them both. They have the money coming in from those few big hitters, as well as this service that could be packed with titles that people are familiar with.
There's a bit more to this, and there are some quotes from Jim Ryan as well. The thing that I want to bring in here is something that Phil Spencer mentioned. It was a good couple of years ago. It was after the ZeniMax acquisition stuff, all the conversations around Bethesda's titles. Elder Scrolls Fallout, are they going to be on PlayStation? Are they going to be exclusive to Xbox? And back then, Phil Spencer said that going forward, Bethesda/ZeniMax's stuff would be available everywhere Game Pass exists. And I've always thought, just for me, I always thought that was the play. It's always, make a Game Pass app, do something that gives you this Xbox catalog, and then ostensibly force that on the rest of the companies to make sure, hey, you want to play Call of Duty, you want to play all these other games, and you have to have the Game Pass app. We know that Xbox were developing the Keystone streaming software stick thing, and I feel like that's the general push. I want to throw in here as well, Jim Ryan saying during the FTC trial, in regards to Game Pass and how that could or couldn't be the future of gaming, him saying that he talked to all the publishers and they unanimously do not like Game Pass because it is value destructive. This comes alongside various insiders, Insider Gaming, etc., saying that Jim Ryan doesn't think Game Pass is the future of gaming, doesn't think it has much weight to it, which I think, for me, if you look at the likes of PlayStation Plus and their attempt to rival it, it's pretty clear that they don't care, at least right now.
I mean, it's interesting. Like, I'm a big fan of Game Pass. I'm a big fan of PlayStation Plus. I think, going off my upbringing and being able to get a few games every year compared to the access that I would have now, I think these subscription services are pretty excellent.
Insane
and I think, with the amount of day one games you can get on Xbox as well, I'm not going to say it's like entirely the future, but I think it is obviously a huge win for Xbox. It's a huge draw to their console. It's a reason that I still play my Xbox Series X as much as I do, because there aren't those big exclusives coming in, but I know I've got a plethora of, great indie titles and great older games that I could jump into. I think, to me, Game Pass is excellent. I think I don't think, necessarily they could go toe-to-toe with Sony on those first-party, kind of on that battlefield and trade punches that way. They need to do their own thing, and that's kind of what they are doing.
Yeah, definitely. It is, like I said, it is just that wider conversation for now. There is no conclusion. There is just the way Jim Ryan's approaching it, the way Phil Spencer's approaching it, and I think that is just interesting for a wider gaming audience. That idea of what do you want from your console manufacturers, and what kind of approach do you want teams to take to the industry overall. Another wrinkle in here, which is kind of interesting because the deal is finally closing, is that Jim Ryan said that they would, if it went forward, they wouldn't share specs for the PlayStation 6 with Microsoft/Xbox. There was a whole conversation there about how it would affect their ability to do business, their ability to design a new system. Those are the kinds of things that haven't been revisited yet in a more public space, but I think that stuff's just fun to talk about in terms of the idea of Jim being like, it's mine, you can't see it.
They're going to do it. They're 100% going to do it. Not only are they going to have to do it because of, all of the games that Microsoft now own, and they want Call of Duty on a PlayStation 6 as soon as that thing is out, but these machines now, it's not like in the PS3 and Xbox 360 era where the kind of guts of those machines were radically different. They were using different processors and whatnot. These machines right now they're so similar. The differences between them are so marginal, and you might give them a slight leg up, but even right now, the Xbox Series X is the world's most powerful console still. So what super advantage could you give them, especially as late in the day as sometimes these dev kits go out? Like third parties don't get them as early as first parties, and by then it would probably be too short of a window for Microsoft to even make as many radical changes as they would have to completely overhaul what they had in mind, and then kind of deliver a PlayStation 6 killer that completely trumps it. Like, that just wouldn't be cost effective.
No.
And I think it's just I don't know. I always thought that was a bit strange. A strange thing for Jim Ryan to say initially.
There's quite a few things in the trial that kind of got a bit snipey or a little bit fanboyish or whatever you want to call it, that were quite funny from the Jim Ryan side, where he was accusing or saying that going forward, they would make an inferior version of Call of Duty for PlayStation because they would push it on Xbox or whatever, even if it did become multi-platform going forward. It's worth mentioning, like I said before, that the original closure date on the acquisition was July 18th. Because per country it's kind of varied in terms of different bodies accepting it, etc. The FTC thing was the wider sort of conversation in America. In the UK, we have the CMA who denied the deal, but that stuff is still going through. So there is an extension right now for the CMA's deal to go back until August 29th. So this entire conversation isn't fully wrapping up just yet, but it's not stopping Microsoft/Xbox making Call of Duty deals and announcing them publicly.
Oh, absolutely.
It's going to go through anyway. It's just that whole legal governance.
I think the CMA obviously being the only body currently in the way right now, even they have kind of said, look, we're going to pause our kind of, the thing they've got going, and we're going to negotiate again. If Microsoft want to, push through a different version of the deal, I kind of make some amendments that we recommended in terms of the cloud-based future, and I can see them just using that as an excuse to go, well, we're not being the only guys in front of this, go on, have it, make those deals, we'll save face, get it through. And it's like, okay, honestly, man, since I saw that Sony news this morning, I just kind of thought, well, the game's goosed. That's all we've got. It's definitely going through now.
Obviously, me and Josh are not, full-on legal analyst whatsoever. We're approaching this from a gamer standpoint, a fan of the industry standpoint. But I do think it's interesting, that whole conversation around cloud gaming, and that itself potentially being the future of gaming. That was what Google Stadia put a lot of their eggs in the basket on. And I just think the idea of overturning the CMA's ruling, historically the CMA has never had a monopoly ruling overturned, but I guess it will be a different framing device as to what the legal cause for this to go through is. And I wonder if they get it in writing just what Xbox do want to do going forward. Like I said, the mention of the Keystone Tech, the everywhere Game Pass exists thing. Someone could drill Phil Spencer on that and just say, what exactly are you getting at? Are you going to have an Xbox app on PlayStation or on Switch? Is that what your grand plan is?
Well, I think that's what they're going to do when they say they're going to go back to the kind of negotiating table. They're going to interrogate that stuff. They're going to alter that part of the deal, perhaps, in order to get it through. And I think that's why they might, be able to spin it as not like an overturning. We haven't made a U-turn on our decision. We put forward some recommendations. Those recommendations were maybe listened to, and then we decided that's good enough. It can go through. I think that's probably the way it will happen if it does happen.
Yeah, there's so many different variables to this, and also the idea that the core deal is changing and that they're only providing Call of Duty is going to stay on the other system. That might in itself be the thing that sways the CMA's side of things. Saying that Call of Duty isn't going to be locked down for at least 10 years. That does allow PlayStation to make a Call of Duty competitor, etc. I do want to mention a whole bunch of stuff here in regards to some of the things that came out for Sony's first party titles and how much money Sony does spend on the likes of The Last of Us, Ghost of Tsushima, Horizon, etc. This just came from the FTC's the court case itself as it played out, revealing that The Last of Us Part 2 cost around $220 million. Horizon Forbidden West cost $212 million. And I just thought that was interesting, coming after ex-Sony chairman Sean Layden said that business model is unsustainable. He just said that he doesn't think in the next generation, meaning this generation, you can take those numbers and multiply them by 2 and still think that you can grow. I think the industry as a whole needs to sit back and think, okay, what are we building? What's the audience expectation? What's the best way to get our story across and say what we need to say? I think that kind of goes hand in hand with the idea of Game Pass can get more unique ideas out there that don't need to be these giant all eggs in a basket titles like what Sony's doing.
I think you're right, and I think that's kind of like the entire reason why Sony is not putting their big titles day one on PlayStation Plus, because it's like, they cost all of this money to make, we need to recoup that and then make profits. To me, the current budgets, of course they're mad, $220 million is a lot of money, but that's like the same as a summer blockbuster, for instance, and gaming has the ability to bring in way more money than some summer blockbusters. But I think, they make a good point there when they mention that if these budgets double into the next generation, that's when things will start becoming unsustainable, because it's not like they're hitting $200 million and saying that's the ceiling. It's going to keep on growing, and that's where I think it could be a real problem.
Yeah, and it was like Jason Schreier saying that the idea of you're starting a AAA game right now, you might not even see that on the current generation of consoles. Last of Us Part 3 could be a PS6 game or whatever. And the last part here is just the idea that, because it's such a mass acquisition of various franchises and timelines and turnaround in regards to the IP, someone like Bobby Kotick would assumedly now leave. We wouldn't be staying in position. Something like Call of Duty wouldn't remain as an annual franchise. These were the conversations that happened across the FTC trial, that we'd get Call of Duty on Switch, and that, they'd push more into mobile. This is just a wider sort of hypothesizing thing, but that's interesting, shaking up the sort of guts of Activision too.
I'm not going to wish for the best on this front. Like, when it was, we were talking about this last year in 2022, there was a report that, if the deal would go through, Bobby Kotick would be out. And we were all like, brilliant, get someone else in, oversee these franchises, make a few changes to Call of Duty, take it off annualizations, give those teams a bit of room to breathe, focus on innovation and whatnot.
Yeah.
I don't necessarily believe that's going to happen anymore, because every kind of story we've had since Microsoft started making acquisitions is how hands-off they are. It's all about that stuff. ZeniMax and Bethesda didn't really change. Their other acquisitions, nothing has really changed apart from the amount of resources they have access to. In no other acquisition, to my knowledge anyway, this could be wrong, but to my knowledge, has Microsoft gone in and kind of rejigged the executives and gone, these are our people, we're going to make these blanket changes, and this is kind of our vision. They might do that with Activision Blizzard, because it is such a huge acquisition, but I don't know, with their hands deals of nature, wouldn't surprise me that if Bobby Kotick did eventually leave,
yes,
but in the short term, kind of stuck around to oversee that transition, to oversee the next few games or the next few years of Activision Blizzard, and then dipped, and then they got someone in. It just depends on how much they think the Activision Blizzard model is working right now, and you could argue that it is. I think on an outside human perspective, you would argue that it isn't, but in terms of pure hard business and money, they might look at it and say, well, why would we want to make any changes? This is bringing in billions and billions and billions of dollars a year. We want to keep that as smooth as possible. I think that would be a mistake, because I don't think that's going to work in the long term, but I'm not a businessman, am I? I would like to see those big changes you just mentioned.
Yeah, and that's what's like it's sort of been talked about, is the potential of what they might do. I think obviously they're going to have to, now they're going to have to develop a version of Call of Duty on Switch. That was one of the main platforms that was mentioned of what they would do with the IP going forward. And there already is Call of Duty Mobile, but it's like, do you start making them more in line with, the Modern Warfares, the big releases, etc. I think it's interesting times in regards to what they're going to do with this stuff. And as we do this video, the full deal is yet to fully go through. It's just that when you look at the amount of different things, machinations that are happening, it's clearly going to happen. And I guess the end of August is when the CMA's ruling has to come through for the UK body. So it might be the end of August in full, but we're still going to talk about it as if it's happening, because it's clearly happening.
It's crazy, man. This thing has been going on for so long.
Oh, yeah.
I kind of forget about how big this is and how big the ramifications is, how much money we're talking about. Like, I was thinking about it before we started shooting this news, and I couldn't quite get my head around we're living through one of, like, the biggest shifts in the gaming industry. Like, such a huge deal. It's going to be transformative, not only for Microsoft, not only for Sony, for Activision Blizzard. Like, this is going to have ripple effects across the industry that we're dealing with for years and years. And it's kind of scary. It's kind of scary.
I think another wrinkle to this as well, just as something to talk about down in the comments, is just that idea of streaming services being the future of media. We sort of lent on them a lot across the pandemic. The amounts of approaches to that, and more so in movies and TV shows and those kind of streaming services that are now kind of bottoming out, that it doesn't seem to be the way that people want to experience their media itself. I think that's an interesting talking point. I think it goes back and forward.
That's an interesting conclusion.
And that's something that we might revisit on the What Culture Gaming podcast. Check this little video out right now, and I've been Scott from WhatCulture.com.
I've been Josh from WhatCulture.com.
Bye.
See ya.